The mystery of the user Cleo on Mass StackExchange has been an unknown in the online math community for over the past 10 years. And in our previous episode, myself and Devin laid out some possible theories behind who Cleo might be and some of the motivations, but understood that probably we would never know the true answer. However, a curious anonymous viewer of our previous episode did some investigation work of their own, which led to finding some critical new pieces of the Cleo mystery. And with that additional information, we were able to not just find out new info on Cleo, but in fact, a very, very solid idea of who Cleo very likely was. In this episode, myself and Devin will discuss what we believe to be the end of the Cleo mystery. I'm stunned because not only have we learned who Cleo is,
Okay.
I've been able to talk to them. I've been able to get their motivation.
Okay.
I'm able to back that motivation up with past posts from them. It really is nothing like what I thought it was going to be.
Really?
I was wrong on nearly all accounts. Cleo, again, poster on a math Q&A forum, very funny person because she would just answer questions with no explanation. She would dip in with these crazy-ass responses.
The integral savant.
Yeah, so here, she would take these crazy ass problems and then would just provide an answer and then dip out.
Yeah.
That's it. No explanation, just an answer. Posted answers for 2 years and then dipped. And it's just been the sort of thing in the math community, the internet legend. Just who the fuck was this person who was able to solve these problems, one, so quickly, and two, that were actually quite challenging. Last year, 2 users went through the effort of trying to do some investigation into her account, as well as some of the answers. And not just that, but some of the other users that were interacting with the Cleo account.
Yeah.
During our video, I don't know what your personal conclusion was, but my personal conclusion was that it was quite possible that there was almost a committee of people who were working on contest problems, and perhaps this was just them posting the problems and then one person would post the solution. I thought it could be a contest type thing with the total asterisks that this person was super legit.
I was kind of split. I mean, I definitely thought whoever it was legit, but I was kind of split between this just being one person who was doing this whole thing, running the account on their own, or just a committee that had problems that they found that were interesting that decided to post it. And we talked about the activity of some of these people, like Vladimir Shetnikov, Oleg K, who's someone else?
Layla Podesny.
Yeah, Layla Podesny.
Layla, gotta love Layla.
Who are all active and asking and answering questions around not just the same general time, but in similar bursts.
Yes. I think people had a similar perspective as well. I mean, I asked a poll about what viewers thought the answer to Cleo was. I mean, this was only 200 people, almost 300 who voted, which isn't a large sample size, but enough to get a good vibe. And a lot of people just thought it was just a legit person. Just no conspiracy, no nothing, just somebody who was solving it just for the funsies. I should have asked about motivations.
Mm-hmm.
I think we were under the perspective that they were doing it for silly reasons, they were probably trolling. I mean, that's what I came away with. They were definitely trolling, they were fucking around.
There definitely seemed there was an element of sticking it to the Stack Exchange behavior and general standard of activity.
Exactly. Somebody who was well integrated and knew just how irritated people would get and really just fucking with them. But a lot of people also had this perspective too of, just some individual who just had an alt account and they would just post the answers to questions they already knew the answers.
Yeah.
So they would post the question, then they would post the answer. It seems that we were just totally off base.
Oh man, okay.
We were totally off base. We were wrong with respect to the motivation. We were wrong with respect to who was behind it.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing is how we eventually caught the person. So I can say for a fact that we, in fact, did catch the person. And it all came about from somebody who saw our podcast.
Really?
Yeah, somebody who saw our podcast and they started looking into some of those interesting users. The way we found out who the person was somebody who viewed the podcast.
Yeah.
An anonymous viewer. They sent me an email because they investigated into specifically this Layla Podesny account. We had hypothesized that whoever was Layla possibly knew more than they were letting out.
Yeah.
So potentially Layla could have been an inroads into finding out who Cleo was. And the only thing we had was this Layla email address, which I actually had sent an email to, and I had reached out to Layla.
No response?
No response. Unfortunately, no response. But the anonymous user did something interesting in which they looked into the recovery email account. So they tried to log into this email account, and they said, like, forgot my password. They went through the recovery inroads until they eventually found the recovery email. And this was honestly just probably an oversight by the person who was behind this, because you don't have to provide a recovery email. In fact, they provided a recovery phone number. The email was enough to unravel everything.
Yeah, I feel like the first thing is a disclaimer. Don't try and log into other people's emails,
absolutely
please.
Do not do that. In this scenario, it led us to find the person. I chatted with the person, so they were kind of cool with it. Actually, they were surprisingly impressed by all of it. But yeah, do not try to log into people's emails. And also, unless you're like a journalist or something trying to like reach out to the person, I'd really advise like, don't reach out to the person. They're just a normal ass person, just like trying to live their life. I think the conclusion to this story is going to be like a little unexpected in like how it goes. Okay. So some people like might take it a little personally. I think that some people have like a personal attachment to the story of Cleo. So like if you're upset by it, just leave the person alone. Just leave the person alone. Just let them live their life and express your frustration in other ways. Create some art or something.
Yeah, create some art.
Or solve a math problem.
Solve a math problem.
Become the Cleo that you want to see in the world. Anyway, the recovery email address only showed 4 characters, I think.
Okay.
It was VRES.
I wonder who that could be.
VRES, which lined up, and not only did it line up with those first 4 characters, if you counted it out, it actually matched the full last name of the account, Vladimir Reshetnikov. Where Vladimir Reshetnikov, and I think I'm going to play B-roll footage right now. Like, let's look at Vladimir Reshetnikov. He also has kind of a similar burst pattern. He has this gap here, then bursts in the same time that all of these users, including Cleo, burst. And I was like, no, that doesn't make any fucking sense. I had to cut that out of the podcast. Vladimir Reshetnikov still is an active user to this day. Not only that, they have like all their social media channels are all linked to their mass StackExchange profile. So at first I wasn't sure, through this anonymous account. I mean, this anonymous account did other stuff. They looked into one of like some of these people's like recovery email accounts to see if they could link the person also with like a bunch of accounts. They also looked into, once we had the suspicion it was Vladimir Reshetnikov, we started looking into his tweets and thought that there was a possibility. I didn't really think the tweets were that big of a thing, other than the fact that he was aware of Cleo. Okay. But that really wasn't too much, seeing as like the two of them interacted. They had posts, so like obviously I thought he would be aware of her. Logical step would be to reach out to Vladimir Reshetnikov. Yes, naturally. And in fact, Vladimir Reshetnikov did, in fact, accept. I hit him up, just told him everything I knew, that, an anonymous poster sent me this information that, like, the email addresses lined up. And he was like, yeah, honestly, I should probably not hide it anymore. Like, yeah, like I was behind the Cleo account. And not only was he behind the Cleo account, he was also willing to admit that he was also behind the accounts Layla Poldesny, Oksana Gimel, and Oleg K. Now,
oh my goodness.
Yes.
He was the ring on his own.
Yes. So there were other accounts as well. I want to be clear. Not all of them in this chart are actually him, only a few of them. But very explicitly, and I have seen proof for some of these, he is in control of the Layla Poldesny, the Oksana Gimel, and the Oleg K account. He even showed me the emails that I sent to the Layla and the Oksana email addresses.
That's funny.
Yes. Future Joe here. I just want to be actually more explicitly clear about what evidence I've actually received and links that I can in fact make for 100% certainty. When it comes to accounts that we know are under Vladimir Reshetnikov's control, that would be Oksana Gimel, Layla Poldesny, and Oleg K. I have received screenshots from all of those accounts being logged in, as well as emails I have sent to those accounts. That being said, when I asked for a screenshot of the Cleo account, he said that he has forgotten the password and lost it, and he has not set a recovery account for the Cleo email address. He has provided me with the email address that was used for the Cleo account, but since it's not public information, there's no way to verify if it actually in fact was the Cleo account. I think the rest of the evidence that I go over in the video is enough to sufficiently link him to the Cleo account. I think it's enough, including the motivation. However, that 100% direct link isn't really there. We just know that a lot of other accounts around that same time that interacted with Cleo a lot were connected to him. Whether or not that's enough to actually pin him to Cleo is up to you. With that being said, we now know the what, right?
Yeah.
So we know after sufficient evidence and just chatting with the guy that one individual singular person was behind the accounts of several posters on StackExchange that would post questions, and then Cleo would provide answers.
Yeah.
Now the big question afterwards is why. And I think
that's a question I have.
I think that this solution of who it was, or like that only one person was behind it, isn't super big of a surprise. I think that's like probably like the obvious answer that like a lot of people come up with. But what I was personally surprised about was like this idea of the why. When I asked him like why, pretty much I said like, why did you go through all this effort? Like what were you doing it? And effectively it was like a hobby.
Okay.
So he has this interest in just difficult integrals. And he said what he would like to do is he would go on to Mathematica, which is the programming language behind Wolfram Alpha.
Yeah.
He would go into Mathematica. He would just use their integration. They're really good with like symbolic calculations. So he would plug in like interesting integrals, see if Mathematica could solve them. If they could, he would say that he would then like modify them slightly until Mathematica wasn't able to solve them. And then he would use those as like practice problems. He just thought it was fun. He would have a hobby. But for ones that he wasn't even able to solve, because he was doing like this method of starting with something that he knew the answer of and then like slightly tweaking it and modifying it, he would have a pretty good idea of what the answer would look like, but it wasn't proven. Like he didn't know how to get to said answer. And not only that, he actually had this large method that he had. He describes it here in this question, a closed form for triple integral involving Heron's formula. He has this crazy ass integral. And then he comes up with what he thinks is a true solution, but he doesn't know how to get there.
Yeah.
So he's like, I'm pretty sure it's this. I did some numeric calculations. It seems to match up. And, someone asked him, like, how did you come up with that? And he goes through his whole method. He has, like, this recurrence relation for it's like this whole method for coming up with, like, the approximate value for what, like, some of these integrals could be.
Yeah.
So his statement is that he would have, like, these challenging integrals. He would challenge himself. And once he couldn't solve, he would have like these ideas of how you would solve them, but he wasn't sure how to get there. Here's an example. Like, he has this integral. He wants to get a closed form. He's asking, consider this integral. He's pretty sure this is what the solution is, but he's not sure. And he asks if somebody could go through the effort to prove it, which someone in fact does.
Yeah.
So it seems like this is his hobby. He likes to just do like challenging integrals. And if he isn't able to figure out like how to do it, then he would leave it up to somebody else to solve.
Yeah.
You might be wondering, what the fuck does this have to do with Cleo? Like, where does Cleo come into all
A little
this?
bit.
What he said is that he was getting frustrated with like people on StackExchange not really caring so much about his questions, because he was posting these questions saying, what's the closed form of this? I'm pretty sure the answer is this. And then people would pretty much say like, why should I give a fuck? Like, I don't care. And you could even see this was October 5th, 2013, literally 1 month before Cleo's first post.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind. This is 1 month before Cleo's first post. He asked like, what's the appropriate way to post conjectures? Because he's saying that like, I'm posting these problems and like people aren't really answering them. Like, I want to know like, what's the proper etiquette? Like, how do I do it so that like I get more engagement? Like people actually want to answer these.
Yeah.
The answer he gets, you have a conjecture, you might think it's true, and you might think it's interesting. Convince the reader of these 2 points. The answer being, why should we care?
Yeah.
And I think that frustrated him because from his perspective, the problem itself was interesting.
Just for the interest of working through a challenging problem.
Yeah, just for the sake of challenge, just for the sake of being able to do it. Like, that's the fun of it. And he even said, I was frustrated that when I posted questions about integrals on StackExchange, I often received comments like, why is this interesting? Or what makes you think that it might have a closed form solution? And then he says, he thinks everything might have a closed form solution. You just have to put in the necessary effort.
Which honestly, I feel like if he was asked that question, like, why do you think this has a closed form solution? He responded, because I think everything has a closed form solution. Knowing how people on StackExchange behave,
exactly,
they probably would have given him a ton of shit for it.
Exactly. So like, I can understand that he's probably frustrated. He's probably getting a hard time for it. So again, where does Cleo come into all of this?
He just wanted to say fuck you to Math Stack Exchange, didn't he?
That's a theory. So, well, this is where we get into like this idea of like primary sources, because he's actually been super sweet, super nice to talk to.
Yeah.
He's looking back on it and reflecting from 10 years ago. Like, how did I feel back then? And now, he has a perspective on what he thinks, how he thinks his motivation was. And I'm inclined to a degree, believe like, that actually was like seriously what most of his motivation was. Although I do think there might be a slight tinge of like this idea of like, fuck you inside of there. He would post questions. This was his thought process. This was his methodology.
Okay.
He would have a question that he wanted to know the answer to. He would have a good idea for what the solution might be, but wasn't 100% sure. So he would want to ask somebody to, go through the solution to show him what it was. Since people were answering his questions, what does he do? He comes up with the idea of an account. So he would post the question as, one of his accounts, and then he would log in as Cleo and then post his approximate solution as Cleo's answer. In his head, this was like a form of, engagement bait.
Yeah.
Where he's almost like throwing down the gauntlet and challenging people like that there's this mystical account out here that can solve the problems and they have the answer. They're just not providing the solution as like a challenge to everybody else to come up with the solution. Meanwhile, he doesn't even know if this is the correct solution. He has an idea, but he doesn't know exactly what the proper correct solution is. He's just saying it as Cleo and saying it's the answer, just to like
drive interest and
push people to want to engage with the poster, like try to answer it.
Which, like, there might have been some spite driven, like, oh, you're not engaging with my posts, I'm gonna mess with you kind of mentality behind it, especially 10 years ago when you're a little younger, a little bit more of a hothead. It's like, even without that, I still think it's kind of like because he's essentially taking the post that he would make originally, where he would have a challenging integral. He'd say, I think the solution is going to look something like this, but I'm not sure. And getting no engagement and really just breaking it up into two separate pieces. He's got the question posed by some alt account and then the approximate solution posted by Cleo.
Exactly. And it really was in all honesty, like the perfect solution, because these people who were getting pissed off that no work was shown, were showing the work in order to like.
Well, there's that, I forget which question it was, but there was one where the solution that was eventually accepted went through like 2 or 3.
That was this one.
Yeah. 2 or 3 huge edits to the post of like lines and lines worth of work.
Yeah, in order just to get to the answer that like Cleo got.
Yeah.
So it actually did really push people to answer his questions. And something that's interesting is, and this is where I say like, there might have been a tinge of like fuck you, but I actually am really inclined to believe most of what he's saying with regard to his motivation, because look at this question, right? And we talked about this, but I actually cut it out of the video.
Yeah, I remember this post.
But this was right after Cleo made her first posts, and Ron Gordon asked the question, with regard to Cleo, are answers that have no explanations useful?
Yeah.
And, it sparked this whole discussion, people saying like, no, yes, blah, blah, blah. But look who chimed in. Him, knowing that he, in fact, himself was Cleo, and he was behind it. So he answered and he said, I agree that an answer containing a proof is more useful, but I consider results only to be useful. Point 1, they challenge other users to look for a proof that they might not even try otherwise because of a hopelessly looking integral. Sometimes the shape of an answer can be a guide to look for a proof. He literally spelled it out right there. It was under our noses the whole time.
Well, and even, I forget if I mentioned this last time, but he has this axiom verbiage up here that was also present in a bunch of Cleo's comments and I think even bio at one point.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, there might have been some spite, but I think there's like a little bit of spite, but mostly just stirring people to actually solve difficult problems.
I think, maybe 5 to 2%, 2 to 5% spike.
I'd agree with that.
95% of this, I genuinely think, is just fueled by this like drive to like challenge people and like also like see the answers to problems. He also says in a couple of places here, one person argued that possibly it was one person acting individually, like in the comments. Such comment has actually since been deleted. Someone said like, it crossed my mind that the questions came from some book. Cleo found the book. In this case, Opie could blow the wind from his or her sails by posting the result in the question in the form of proves integral equals result. And Vladimir Reshetnikov refutes this. Again, well knowing that actually he is in fact doing this by saying it seems unlikely because in many cases OP awarded bounties for the questions and they were awarded not to Cleo's answer but for somebody else's that contained the proof. And this makes sense because he wasn't actually looking for the answer. He wasn't looking to flex on people. He actually was looking to see what the proof was.
Yeah.
And I think that makes sense when you see that Cleo's answers were never marked as the answer. Not once. Although I will say there's a bit of an asterisk there.
Okay.
Which we'll talk about. But Cleo's answers were not marked as answers because, from his perspective, he was looking for the proof. He was not looking for the solution. Now, would you like to know the little mini asterisks?
Yeah.
One thing that I did ask him was, his method for coming up with approximate integral solutions actually wouldn't work with this problem when I went through it.
Really?
So I asked him, I said, how'd you come up with this one? And he said he actually had solved this one out himself.
Oh.
So he did have an answer. And I said, if you already solved this one out yourself, why'd you ask it? His answer was, he said, I wanted to see what other people's answers were.
Like he wanted to see how they got there?
Yeah, he wanted to see how they got there. I mean, he said that the way that this guy did it was like totally different than the way he did it. Future Joe here again. Since I initially recorded this video and I've been in the process of editing, he has posted on his Twitter the solution that he came up with to the famous problem that was solved by Cleo. The solution I will put somewhere over here. Again, there's like no way that we can actually verify that this file or this solution does come from that period of time, but we can see that it is not the same as the solution that was provided by Ron Gordon. I did also find, some interesting scenarios in which this was a question asked by Oksana
Gimel.
And then he posted a solution and accepted.
Yeah.
Some other people did have a solution. So I do think, there may be like this idea of like posting questions that the answer to because you put in like the hard work and you kind of want to like show it off. You could take that how you take it. I think for the majority of questions, though, and the reason why he did Cleo, I'm willing to buy in that, it was really just because he was a dude who's super interested in integrals. And with that in mind, when he would come to a wall, like Stack Overflow or a bunch of dicks.
Yeah.
So as a way to challenge them, he said...
He rage baited them.
He rage baited. He said, my goal was to create more engagement and draw attention to interesting math problems, not to annoy or deceive people. I said, why did you eventually stop?
Did he stop because of the outrage?
He said, quote, I didn't expect that some people would get really mad about Cleo, and I stopped because I didn't want to provoke them anymore. I kept posting questions under my own name with explanations, like in the one that I linked above. He did it for 2 years, got some good stuff out of it, created a great mystery, but eventually the guilt almost of, understanding that he was kind of actually genuinely pissing people off got to him, and he said, this wasn't worth the hassle anymore. I think that this whole Cleo account, super harmless at the end of the day. I think it was a very harmless endeavor. It's been a great story, so I've really enjoyed it. I've really appreciated it. So, in my opinion, it's been a net positive on my Math Stack Exchange experience. But he's definitely super remorseful, very apologetic. He says, quote, I hope it created more fun and entertainment than hurt feelings and misgivings. If you're going to write about it, please tell that I sincerely apologize if I hurt somebody. Very much looking back also from an apologetic perspective. I don't think the blowback was warranted.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of nervous that this video might cause unwarranted blowback as well.
I don't think he has to be as remorseful as he seemingly feels.
Yeah.
I get some people get pissed off by that, but I think the behavior of Math Stack Exchange there was a little over the top.
Yeah, genuinely over the top.
Yeah.
For something that was so minor and honestly not that deep.
Granted, as the legend of Cleo grew, the posts would get more popular, but I feel most of the traffic on Stack Exchange isn't going to be directed towards those kinds of questions. So you just end up with a small number of hyper online active people getting way too caught up in how they think their favorite forum should be run.
I almost hope that this inspires some people to create actual, like, real, like, genuine Cleo accounts that are just dedicated to be like, LMFAO, stick it to the man, go fuck
Yeah.
yourself. Maybe the math Stack Exchange users don't want that, but I like it.
It would make for more fun stories.
It'll make for more fun stories. Anyway, that's it.